1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardships that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. So that chapter that was just read out then, and what we're looking at today, this is quite possibly one of the most famous passages in the Bible. This is a passage that's often read out at weddings or memorial services or at any other event where a focus on love is the main priority for that occasion. Because words like love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, as we see in verse 4. Well, these words can be agreed upon by anyone. They're not the kind of thing that anyone would actually want to be seen as disagreeing with, as they're calling for what is positive behaviour and the kind of treatment that we would all like to receive. And of course, this is what leads this chapter to becoming the passage of choice when someone wants to quote from the Bible, like at a wedding, as mentioned a moment ago. They want to be able to use the Bible's words, but they want to do that without actually talking about anything particularly Christian. So what I mean by that is, you can quote from this passage, but you don't have to talk about Jesus in order to receive comfort from these words. This passage, whilst being a very well-known passage of the Bible, it does not mention God or Jesus or the Spirit or anything at all to do with judgment and the work of Jesus' death on the cross, the very thing that we're all here this morning to remember. Hence why this passage gets quoted from in all different situations, like weddings and memorial services, because it's not confronting. In fact, it's actually the opposite of that. This passage simply has a nice message about how wonderful love is that anyone can agree with and what anyone would like to have in their life. So this passage is often read with the aim of encouraging kindness to other people and to be positive in life and to look for good things so everyone can be happy. So those words, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. Well, these words sound good to anyone hearing them. So you could really forget what the rest of the Bible has to say and even forget about God. Because often when people use this passage, they are using it to say if we all lived by these words about love, then everything would be perfect. If we just loved others in the same way this passage says to love others, and if people just loved us the same way this passage says to love others, then we could simply make heaven on earth. But whilst this passage is often used as a way of saying, hey, look, isn't love great? let's be more like this. Let's do what this passage says here. Whilst it makes being kind to others the focus, this is in fact and sadly really a shallow view of love that actually misses what true love really is and how it is that any of us can know what true love is. Even though these words may go well with people in the world today, and perhaps even with many Christians, it sadly, when it's used, often misses what true love is. Hence why the words often fail to get what is the desired outcome of everyone loving each other, as many people may agree with the words of this passage, whilst they're failing to live up to them and failing to understand how we can know what love is. See, look at what this passage says about what love is and what it is not to be. We see it says that love is patient. And of course, when we think of patience today, we would normally get the image of someone waiting their turn quietly without getting worked up. Or perhaps see patience by someone simply doing the same task carefully or repeatedly without becoming rushed or frustrated as they do it. Or likewise, patience may be just simply patiently explaining something to someone, maybe multiple times because they just don't get it the first time. And doing that, being patient with them, that's seen as what is being talked about here, being patient with another person. These kind of things is usually what people are talking about when they speak and think of patience. Being patient with people, or being patient as we do something repeatedly or wait for something longer than what we would otherwise want to. But there is another kind of patience, which is really more fitting with what's been said here. And that is that patience is the ability to be wronged and to not retaliate. To not give in to the desire to get even or expected to be compensated for that wrong, but instead being able to accept being the victim of someone else's poor behaviour and being understanding and even forgiving or waiting perhaps a long time for true justice to be done. As we see in the Corinthian Church, the church that this letter and this passage was written to, we see it talks about how many members had been wronged by others who had not been loving towards them. And as we see back in chapter 6, some felt the need to take others to court so as to be compensated for the losses that they had faced by these other people. And then in chapter 11, one of the things we see in that passage is that people were being wronged at meals, at meal time in the church. As some people would take more than they could possibly ever eat, while others went without. So we see that through this letter, that there are people being wronged in the Corinthian church. And of course, as I said a moment ago, when people get wronged, their natural response is to get even. It's normal in this world to want to retaliate against those who have wronged you, and perhaps not wait for justice and God's justice to take its course. But the idea of love actually goes completely against that kind of attitude. Because, as we see here, love is patient. And patience is not retaliating against those who have wronged you, but instead it's persevering. It's persevering against that desire to get even and to take matters into your own hands. And that kind of thinking actually goes right back to one of the earliest teachings of Jesus. One of the things we see as he spoke to people on the Mount, he says something which is very hard for people to accept, but it was a teaching of Jesus. He says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. So that's the patience that Paul is speaking of here. Not retaliating when someone does wrong, but instead persevering through it. Not hating the other person, not getting revenge on them, not even ignoring them, but instead simply having patience. Having patience, that is what true love demands. And of course, linked in with love being patient is that love is kind. And that is obviously very important, because if everyone was kind, then there would be little need to be patient with those who are being unkind. If everyone genuinely put others first, which is what true love should drive us to do, then we would not be required to be patient with those who wrong us. But it's due to a lack of love that people do the wrong things. So people are not always kind to each other. And when we talk about kindness, we're not just talking about niceness or politeness. And many people in our society today value politeness. But it doesn't mean that they actually care for the other person or even have their best interests. The nicest and politest person that you will ever find is the guy trying to sell you a used car. They'll tell you everything that you want to hear. They'll be your best friend, at least until you say that you're not interested or you hand over the cash. So that means anyone can smile and be nice, but it doesn't make them kind. Their nice words doesn't mean that they're being genuinely loving. In fact, true love and real kindness is going to be full of honesty and being real with people. Not just saying what people want to hear, but telling them what they need to hear for their own good. So one of the biggest problems we have in our society right now, here in 2022, is that people are lied to straight to their face, because it's considered more important to not hurt people's feelings with the truth than it is to tell them what they actually need to know. That it's better to let them go right off the edge of a cliff than it is to warn them of the danger they're facing, because it's not something that they might want to hear. But if you truly love someone, then a real act of true kindness will always be for the other person's best interests and not just being polite to them. And even more than that, what really makes for true kindness is to do all that was just said above, but to do it with everyone. Not just being kind to people who are kind to ourselves, and not just being kind with our friends and our family, but even being kind to those who may be the unkind people who have wronged us, as spoken of before. As we looked at a moment ago, Jesus said to turn the other cheek when people wrong us. But we're not to get even when someone harms us, but we are to resist the urge to retaliate and be patient. But then he went even further than that, because Jesus goes on to say that not only should we not get even, but we're also to be kind to those who have actually wronged us. Because Jesus also said, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? And then he went on to say, and if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? See, what he was saying there was, it's easy to love those who are good to you. It's easy to love those who you're friends with. But what about those who you're not friends with? What about your enemies? What about the people who have been unkind to you? Hence why this is why he also goes on to say, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So Jesus is saying true love must go further than just scratching each other's backs. It must go further than just being nice to those who are nice to you. This love being spoken of here is totally different to the type of love that we see in our world today, where as long as you show niceness to some people who are nice to you, then you have done your duty. We've probably all known someone who is kind and nice and polite to ourselves. But then you go into like a shop or a restaurant or something, and they're the rudest people you could imagine. And you sit there thinking, who are you? You're so different depending on who you're talking to. You're so nice to me, and yet so rude to other people. And we've probably also had that friend who is kind and nice and polite to us until one day that they're not. Until one day you see their other side, and then you suddenly realise just how fake that kindness has always been. But what this passage says to us is that true love will be truly kind and not just polite and nice. It will be truly kind to everyone, even those who are unkind to us. The love being spoken of in 1 Corinthians 13 is that deep kind of love that Jesus spoke of, and not just a shallow type of kindness that our world celebrates. But as I said at the start, more than just saying what love is, well, this passage also tells us what love is not. Because we also see here that love shouldn't be boastful. That love and pride in oneself, these do not go together. As we see throughout this entire letter, many in the church in Corinth thought of themselves as being better than others. They saw themselves as even being better than some of their leaders, hence all the divisions between them as some followed one leader over another. And this is why Paul asked them back in chapter 4. He said, "What do you have that you did not receive? If then you received it, why do you boast as if you did not receive it?" So he said that because he wanted them to realize that all that they have, it comes from God. So there is nothing that they should be proud of. They've done nothing to earn what God has given them. So they actually have nothing to boast about. And as we saw in our passage last week, as we looked at Paul talking about spiritual gifts, well, we saw there that many in the Corinthian church saw their own gifts as making them more important in the church than others in the church. And this egotistic attitude that they had is what led them, and this egotistic attitude, I should say, is what leads us into the opening part of this passage here today. So let me read it out again. Paul says to them in the first few verses here, having commented on the gifts that they have in just a chapter before this one, he starts this one off by saying, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardships that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing." See, all these gifts that they're so proud of mean nothing if they're done with a lack of love and a lack of humility. As love is all that matters, they should not be taking pride in the gifts that God has given them in order to serve the church. Their gifts are not to increase their own status in the church, as they are given only in order to serve the church. But if they're using God's gifts to raise their own profiles, many of them were doing, then they're not being loving. They're being boastful and full of pride. And of course, this unloving behaviour, that is what led to them having the arrogance that we see filling this church. We see in the Corinthian church, people look down at others as having less worth or of being of less value, which in turn also created much of the jealousy in that church and the envy issues, as others wanted to rise to the top of the ladder so they could be the ones that everyone else looked up to, and then they would be the ones looking down at all those other people. So it's not hard to see how a lack of love is what led to many of the bad behaviours that filled the Corinthian church. Hence why Paul says in our passage today about the love that they do not have. He says that love does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonour others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, and it keeps no record of wrongs. These people had the love that Christians are supposed to have, like the love that we just looked at before, where people are to be patient and kind, where to be considerate of others and to look out for other people's best interests. If they're capable of true love, then these issues of pride and arrogance and jealousy, these things wouldn't have happened. But it's a lack of love for God and for his people and for the people of this world that filled their heart with envy and pride and caused so many of these other issues. They had all these problems as they did the very things that Jesus taught not to do, and they failed to love others the same way God had loved them. So what we see with what love is and with what love is not is that true love will be truly patient and truly kind, as that is what real love is. And that's why such love will not be boastful or jealous or angry, because these are not what love is. Those things make for what is the absence of true love. So with all that stuff in mind, having looked at 1 Corinthians 13 there, the question might be, what does this have to do with Good Friday? We're here today to talk about the day Jesus died. We're here today to remember that event. But so far we haven't even mentioned it, other than to say that this passage that we just looked at doesn't even mention it. So what is the point of looking at what true love is and not looking at the cross on Good Friday? Why not just look at the end of Luke chapter 24 or something? Why 1 Corinthians 13? Well, the answer is simply this. What happened on the cross is a true love being spoken of here. What happened both in the lead up to Jesus dying as well as the actual moment he was crucified was a true love being demonstrated in a way that goes far beyond anything we could possibly hope to achieve ourselves. As said at the start, our world loves this passage. It loves to talk about love. It loves to quote this kind of stuff. Love is patient, love is kind. But then it ignores the ultimate demonstration of that love. It actually forgets how it is that we can even know this love and how this kind of love entered into the world in the first place. See, when Jesus went to the cross, when he was captured and he was beaten, he went through all that torment because his Father told him to. Just before Jesus died, he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he prayed on the Mount of Olives, knowing exactly what was about to happen, as he was soon to be arrested and then crucified. And in that prayer, he said to his Father, knowing exactly what was about to happen, he said, "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." See, Jesus was about to take the sins of the world upon himself. He was about to take your sins and my sins, all of it was to be put onto him. And it says that during this time of prayer, as he was saying to his Father, "Your will be done," it describes the situation by saying, being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. So the pressure of this moment was quite clearly overwhelming. Yet despite this, he's saying to his Father, out of love for you, I follow your commands. I do what you say. Your will be done, not mine. Hence why before this moment happened, Jesus said to his disciples, I love the Father and do exactly what my Father has commanded me. So at this moment, before the cross, before Good Friday, already we're seeing the first act of what true love is. What it means to put someone else's desires before your own, no matter how hard that might be. But there's much more to this show of this love by Jesus than even that. There's more to be seen of this love Jesus demonstrated on the day he died. So it said a moment ago, on the cross he was taking the sins of the world. Your sins and mine. All being put onto Jesus. So as to take the punishment for that sin so that we don't need to. And I started the day by saying 1 Corinthians 13 is one of the most well-known passages in the Bible because of its comforting words about love. But if there is a passage with a verse that outrates even this one for how much it is quoted, then it's surely John chapter 3 and its famous verse 16. Because in that verse, we see clearly the love God has for us and what was really being given to us at Easter. That famous verse says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. See, out of love for the world, out of love for us, Good Friday happened. Out of love for us, God sent his Son to die for us. What more of an act of love can you get than to sacrifice one's own life and to sacrifice the most important thing to yourself? So this is why when Jesus died on the cross, we must understand that it wasn't an accident, nor something out of God's control. This is why after that prayer in the garden, when they came to arrest him, and Peter pulled out a sword in order to protect Jesus from being arrested, Jesus said to him, put it away, and then said, do you think I cannot call my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? So even though Jesus was facing death, he could have ended that moment at any time. But as he went on to say, he said, but how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? So as Jesus went to the cross, he was carrying out God's plan for our salvation. This happened according to plan. And that shows us how even when we had rejected God and rejected his ways, he'd already planned on bringing us back to him. That Jesus' death was no accident out of God's control. That Jesus could have got out of this if he wanted to, but out of love for his Father and out of love for us, he didn't walk away from his moment of trial. There could be no greater love than that. No greater love than to know the full cost of an action and still go through with it only for the benefit of another person. Not risking your life to save another person, but to knowingly give your life to save them. And as mentioned a moment ago, the people being saved, at least from a worldly point of view, are not worth saving. The people being saved, the ones Jesus died for, had rejected him. They had sinned, and yet he still died for them anyway. We see that when Jesus died on the cross, the people who put him there hated him. They hated him, and they showed no consideration for him. We see that they mocked him, and they tormented him. They laughed at his suffering and rejected what he was doing for them as they were blind to the sacrifice being made for the world. And despite how these people that Jesus had come to save, had they responded to his sacrifice for them in such a hostile way, well, what did Jesus say at that moment? What did he say at that moment as they were mocking him on the cross? Well, he simply prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And despite what would be the normal reaction, the normal human reaction, that would be to hate the ones doing this. The normal reaction to want to see justice done immediately and to see them pay for their crimes and their evil. Despite how any one of us might act if we're in such a situation, we see that out of love for us, Jesus says to forgive them because he knows he's paying for that very evil. Jesus is already, out of true love, being prepared to die for them. So he already knew what these people were like, and as cruel as they were, he loved them anyway. And in patience, he asked for their forgiveness. So this shows us in an undisputable way that Jesus knew what he was doing up there on the cross. He knew why it had to be done, and he knew exactly who he was doing it for. He was dying to take the sins of the world, who didn't deserve such an act, but he did it anyway because that's what true love does. He made himself one of us. He came down to earth as the Son of God, and he made himself one of us and then died for us so that we might live. And as Paul says in his other letter to the Philippians, he describes this act by saying about Jesus, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So this is the ultimate demonstration of love. What is said here in the Corinthians is the ideal. It's what love is to be and not to be. But it's an ideal that none of us ever reach. All of us fail to be perfectly loving. All of us are impatient. All of us are at times unkind. All of us can envy, and all of us have boasted at some point. None of us ever get this right. We read the words, we might want to agree with them, but not one person ever gets this right. But what we see on Good Friday, what we see on the cross is that Jesus did get this right. Jesus did show this love and act out this love perfectly. He was patient with us to the point that he turned the other cheek, even when we were the ones killing him. He was truly kind to us by being willing to save us from our own sin, by dying for us when we were his enemies. And he was not boastful or full of pride when he, the Son of God, the one that all creation was made through, came to earth as just one of us in order to die for us. Jesus shows us what true love is. And that today, that is what needs to be remembered more than anything. To quote from another John 3:16, this time from 1 John 3:16. It says there, this is how we know what true love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. The love Jesus showed us in dying on the cross so that we might live. Well, that's what true love is all about. We don't and we can't know what love is just by reading this 1 Corinthians 13 passage out at a wedding or something. We don't know it just by hearing the words and nodding our head. We know it because Jesus showed it to us. He lived this true love out. He lived it out by what he did for us on Good Friday, so that by his death, we can now live.